If you've been to our shop in Charleston, South Carolina, you might have seen this one. This is a 1951 Series I Land Rover. The original design from Land Rover. This is an 80-inch wheelbase. This is a special vehicle that we feel honored to own. Land Rover at the time they just came out in 1948 with this design after World War II, and they took some heavy inspiration from the Jeep Willys. You'll see that in its serviceability and the simplicity. You know, very simple 4x4 for whether it be a war or utility vehicle. And this one was one of 673 sold in North America in 1951, which makes it really interesting. So again, we bought this car we found it in the desert of Nevada, but it was originally sold in Hollywood in 1951. So it's fun to fantasize about who might have bought this vehicle, because you have to put things in perspective. We're coming off World War II. Land Rover as a company doesn't necessarily exist at this point. It was called the Land Rover, but the legal name of the company was the Rover Company. And so fairly new to the market. This was very much a new thing. Found it in a very similar condition. Sitting in the sun for many years, so everything was completely rust-free, a very dry climate. But the sun had certainly taken its toll. The steering column here is pretty much eaten away, everything with the steering wheel down to the bare metal. Some of those things we've kept. And kind of some of the interesting things as you look at this, there's a few things that aren't necessarily period correct. Some of the fixes over the years, you'll see this brace that somebody had put on at some point in its history. The steering wheel is actually a late Series 2, potentially Series 3 steering column. And you can imagine someone over the years needed a replacement part. You didn't have the internet, so you made it work with what you had, which is very much a Land Rover thing. So we're going to keep all of that and then really just continue to tell the story of this vehicle. We drive it all the time. If you've come to our shop in Charleston, it's certainly a staple in our tour of our facility, but a really fun vehicle to drive. Not the most convenient thing. It has its quirks, but definitely a pleasure to drive this one. As you look on the dash here, on the bulkhead, you'll see whoever owned it last maybe didn't know what all these buttons and switches did, and they actually scribbled on there some of the functionality of each of the buttons, so they had a bit of some instructions on there. So fun thing to look at. Would have been originally shipped from the factory in green. At the moment, it's probably 3 or 4 different colors of green. You'll see a little bit of use of spray paint on the front, and again, just a very Land Rover thing. Just keep it on the road and spray it, and not to worry about the cosmetic side of things. But this was originally a darker green. You'll see a little bit of it on the seat box that are left behind, some of it a bit on the wheels. We're going to keep it like this. Again, we love the history of this one, and I think all the imperfection of this vehicle certainly tell that story. So I was fortunate enough to find this vehicle, and that's really my portion of the process, right? Finding the vehicle, we brought it back to our facility, and an old Land Rover like this, I mean, it truly makes you become a mechanic. Fortunately for me, we have a phenomenal team at Himalaya that can certainly help carry the load as far as the technical side of getting this one back on the road. I mean, a few guys on our team, particularly Dan and Ben, pulled out the engine and put a lot of time into that. And then Nicholas, who's come all the way up from Chile, spent a tremendous amount of time getting this back on the road and doing it in a way with authenticity, right? So we didn't just rip out the old 1.6 liter engine and put a 2 1/4 engine in there just because we have quite a few of those. We have the original engine. Those parts are a bit tricky to come by and certainly harder than the Series 2, but it was important to the team that we kept it original, including the imperfections. When we're rebuilding vehicles like this, we certainly think about serviceability and modern, adding modern components, not just for the performance side of things, but to make it easier to own, right? This vehicle is a bit of a labor of love. There's always something going on, and fortunately I have the team to fall back on, and I've got another Land Rover that I can jump into if this one's down. So when we think about building these vehicles and we depart massively from the drivetrain and suspension at times, a lot of that's for serviceability, right? Something that's easier to maintain anywhere in the country where you don't have the access to Nicholas or Dan or Ben or Rob. So I think something interesting to think about. You know, this vehicle has its time and place, and I can grab the right lane and make sure I'm in the slow lane cruising along. But there's certainly some advantages when you think about improving on some of the things that in 1951 just weren't important with the vehicles that were on the road. So, you know, it's a good one to give us a baseline of what we do. I mean, you get in this vehicle and then immediately get into one of our upgraded Series 2s. It's a, you know, and I say it to the guys all the time, it'll give you the chills. It really will, because you start adding power steering, you start adding disc brakes and a better engine and certain things, and it becomes a vehicle you can really drive in a modern context. Like I said earlier, this is a vehicle that you really have to focus on driving, which is great, time and place. You know, cruising out here on this beautiful morning or you know, over the weekend, it's a great way to disconnect. But you know, maybe not the best vehicle if you had to commute in it. But it does put it in perspective with the upgrades our team does and all the areas that they're pushing to improve old Land Rovers. This is a great one to kind of, you know, bring you back to the baseline and understand. Give you a real idea of the improvements and the direction we're heading. So on the front of this one, you'll see on the grille here, a lot of old Land Rovers and vintage Porsches. A lot of times you'll see different vintage car club badges. This one happens to have one from Chile. And for me, in this story of this vehicle, in its current condition, you can't tell that story without Nicholas. Nicholas moved up from Chile to join Himalaya. And although he's in his early 20s, he has a tremendous amount of time working on old Land Rovers. His grandfather started a service business in Chile in the 1970s. So as you know, about 12 years old, Nicholas was turning wrenches on old Land Rovers, in particular, a lot of Series 1. So had a tremendous amount of knowledge. And when he moved here, this was a good project for him to jump in on and get his feet wet and kind of get onboarded with the team. And now he's become a crucial part on all the custom jobs and some of the other projects we're working on. But you know, we did put that car club badge on there to pay homage to Nicholas, and his father and his grandfather have always all worked on Land Rovers as well. So we've got the windscreen folded down, which is nothing cooler on a Land Rover, but we'll show you what's under the bonnet here. Pop these up. So the spare tire on this one would have been mounted behind the second row bulkhead, out of the way of the windscreen. I'll flip that up here. You'll see that beautiful 1.6 liter engine. So Land Rover only ran this for a few years before moving on to the 2 liter within the Series 1 line, and then eventually the 2.25, which is ran all the way through the Series 2A and 3. But this is the original engine, roughly 50 horsepower. Great little engine, bit of a sewing machine when it's running, quite quiet. Our team meticulously rebuilt everything from a drivetrain perspective, but then kept the original patina and history of it. So really wanted to keep this one original just to honor the history of Land Rover. But you'll see some beautiful touches with the serial number on top of the engine there and some of the use of brass. 80-inch wheelbase, so wheel to wheel, 80 inches. You'll see it a little different than the Series 2 we often use. A much shorter vehicle, really beautiful lines on this vehicle, very simple. You'll see even the doors here. Simply pull them up, pop them up, out of the way. I mean, nothing more simple than this one here. For those that are familiar with the Jeep Willys from that era, you will certainly see some inspiration, mostly in the idea of the vehicle. Certainly Land Rover had a different construction and different engine and different materials they used based on what was available after World War II. And as you look closely, you'll see the use of aluminum, which Land Rover carried all the way through 2015 with the Defender. The entire body of this vehicle is going to be aluminum. You'll see rivets and some inspiration from how aircrafts were built back in the 40s and 50s. And then you'll see the use of a lot of brass as you get closely here on these gauges, which are some of the most beautiful gauges I've ever seen. Brass bezels all the way around. We've fully restored those. You've got brass bezels around the headlights. But as you look closely on some of the early Land Rover badges, you'll see it says Birmingham, where some of the later badges for many years said Solihull. So that's a great indication of some of the early badges from Land Rover. And then of course you'll see that the headlight surround, the grille here, very unique to the year. Prior to this, in 1948, the lights were behind the grille. They actually had 2 tractor lights in there, not the most efficient thing. And then when Land Rover started thinking about exporting the the vehicle to other countries, they moved to this setup where you have the grille around the lights. Really great look. They didn't run this very long. Quickly within the Series II, they went to a very similar grille that you'll see on the Series II. So as you're looking around the vehicle, you're probably wondering where we fill it up with fuel. So Land Rover did it a bit different back in 1951. So under the passenger side seat here, you'll find safely positioned a couple gallons of fuel. Interesting placement for it, but that's how you fill an old Land Rover from this era. Then under the seat, these are original seats, obviously been re-vinyled over the years, but we were able to track these down. The seats sitting in the desert that were originally in this vehicle just deteriorated in the hot sun. But we had somebody doing a restoration in England, and they were nice enough to sell us the original seats out of his Series I. We imported them all the way into the country, but horsehair was utilized in under here, which is kind of fun. You'll see they were originally in green vinyl. Somebody over the years had recovered those in a similar green, but again, part of the story there. And then on the windscreen here, you'll notice the wiper motor. There's only one of them. You might think to yourself that maybe one had disappeared over the years, but it was actually a factory option. You had to pay a little extra to have a wiper for your passengers. So if you've been around an old Land Rover, sometimes you've seen there's a hole in the front here in the chassis. You'll see a hole here about the size of a drive shaft, and you'll see the same one in the rear cross member. So that's a PTO. So Land Rover had all sorts of accessories you could run off the drivetrain, and they were powered by the drivetrain. The front, you might have a capstan winch, which actually have one in my office that I'm thinking about installing on this one. Very rare winch. Like I said, there's some things on here, as you know, the enthusiasts in the world will say, well, those couple little things that maybe aren't original. Some of the lights in the back have potentially been modified. Of course, you got the braces on the wing, the steering column, and the steering wheel. But again, that's all part of the story of this vehicle, and I think we're certainly honored to continue that story. We drive it often. We like going to different shows with it and showing it off to enthusiasts, but just enjoying it. I mean, I can tell you this is the type of vehicle that when you get behind the wheel, you have to pay attention. There's no power steering. There's very simple brakes. It's tiny. When you're driving next to a tractor trailer in a vehicle like this, it'll certainly wake you up, but it's a tremendous feeling and something that allows you to disconnect and really focus on just driving the vehicle. It's something I enjoy, and it's a way for me to kind of clear my head. I get behind the wheel of this one and go for a cruise. So it's a special vehicle to us. So all those little things, and then really every time you drive this vehicle, you discover something. Nicholas actually rebuilt this transmission, took everything apart, and one of the fun details you actually saw on the gears themselves, saw the technician from 1951 that did the original assembly signed and dated on the gear. Just the level of attention to detail at the time was really remarkable. So we had Nicholas sign a gear himself. So maybe another 40 years from now, somebody else will open up that transmission and maybe service it and see Nicholas's signature right next to the original technician. Again, just adding to that story. I mean, that's what it's all about with a vehicle like this. So, I've got 2 daughters, one more on the way, and let them crawl around this. This is a staple at our house as well. And they were building a fort just the other day in the back here and probably scratching it and doing different things. But again, that's all just adding to the story of this vehicle that I'm currently the caretaker of. Eventually it'll be passed on. I'd like to think someday my daughters will be driving this vehicle. But if not, somebody else will continue to carry on the story. It'll certainly outlive me if we do it right. So again, if you find yourself visiting our facility here in Charleston, where we build all these vehicles from the ground up, you'll see this somewhere along the tour of our facility. A lot of fun to drive. Come to our facility, we'll take you for a cruise in it while we show you some of our builds. I'm gonna pop the doors off because we've never really driven it completely without the doors. So as we depart here, I think we're gonna take some time and go for a cruise without the doors and enjoy this thing for what it is.